It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Travis Hoffman, who is the Extension Sheep Specialist for the North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota. So he's got a pretty broad reach there, and we are very excited to have you, Travis, and I will let you take over to talk about hitting the target with quality lamb and goat. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm excited to be a part of a group that I consider esteemed colleagues. And so as you brought it up there at the University of Idaho is that you get a sheep and goat extension person as well. What I learned in my quick hiring here is that even on paper, it's a sheep, but it's also I get some goat questions. And so yourself and Dr. Philip Bass asked me to include a little bit about goat. And in fact, that's a minority of our talk today. But at least that provides us some of the information that we will go through as well. So the first slide that I have here is just a picture of American lamb and kind of identifying our bullseye. I will tell you that we're going to go over quite a bit of information. I'll keep it moving and try to hopefully inspire some questions. And then again, we'll have some other thoughts and insight as well. But this is a picture of Spot, and Spot was put together with some genetic progress and looking at increases in terms of muscularity. Now, as we think about what can we have an impact on our end product and hitting the target, that's something that we can keep into consideration. But certainly don't all need to look like Spot as well. But this one was one that was extremely muscular and a lamb that had as large of an eye as I had seen in one of a 6.2 square inch loin eye. And so certainly on the top end of those. One of the things that we keep in consideration, or at least I do, and this comes from our lamb industry roadmap that was funded by the American Lamb Board on pulling things together of where does lamb fit on our consumer value proposition and lamb certainly is one of those that's on the higher end relative to costs of proteins. But some of the things of kind of pulling something together of convenient, nutritious, on trend, available, sustainable and local. And in fact, I'll talk about kind of some of the ideas that we pulled together with also some of our national lamb quality audit. This is one of them is on what is lamb. And so with what is lamb, the retailers and food service individuals first described lamb as young sheep. And so that's a good thing. And as I was tasked to talk about some on yield grading and quality grading, that's certainly something that is important. Red meat alternative, delicious, flavorful attributes, delicacy and a high-end meat, healthy protein as well. So here's the big picture one that we could discuss on everything that has a lamb and product quality. And so when we think about this of genetics on the first portion of conception and parturition through growth and different factors that have an impact, we have an impact on slaughter as well in relation to lamb quality and or goat, as we use that analogously in my presentation. And then some in terms of meat composition of what are those volatile aroma compounds and how does that have an impact on meat aroma and flavor? And truthfully, from time restraints, we're not going to get through all of those. But maybe if we just look at that, we say, hey, it's really easy. And in fact, I would have to disagree. And I think that there's a complex approach that takes the whole supply chain. And I'm excited to hear the discussion from our producers and the insight that we have from our colleagues that are also joining us on our webinar sponsored by University of Idaho, University of Wyoming, and Utah State University. So I put this in here just to get the wheels turning. And in fact, as we think about it, of making magic happen, and that's what I consider lambing. And so as we think about it of a farm flock operation or even a range flock operation, is that we're getting the wheels going in relation to the production of our animals and the production of lamb. Now, here's one of the fun questions that Dr. Ellison, potentially gets as well. And I know that when we think about what breeds of sheep, and in fact, the easiest way to get into argument is be convinced that your breed is the correct one or your breed is the correct one for everybody. And that's just simply not the case. We have differences in terms of production systems, differences in terms of goals, differences in terms of how or what emphasis one would wish to put on wool quality. These are some of the breeds. And again, for the extra credit points at the end, my home breed, or the breed that my family raised, is Corriedales, and that's the bottom right. But certainly each individual has their own options. And in fact, if we wish from a commercial setting to provide a little bit more growth and a little bit more muscularity, and truthfully, a product that could be a little bit more appealing in both, probably in the retail and food service, is that we can incorporate some of those meat breeds and help us with the growth and approach. Now, there's no doubt that hair breeds have had a continued emphasis and continued increase here in the United States. And in fact, the Katahdin is the largest breed registry in terms of number of animals registered. Now, again, there's a lot in our commercial sector, but I was in San Angelo, Texas, and certainly a lot of the things have changed from what had previously been the wool breed sheep to a lot more that are a little bit more moderate, a little bit certainly shedding or hair breed type sheep of the Katahdin, Dorper, White Dorper influenced. Now, I put this together, this picture, and in fact, this is one of the first things that I got to work on at my position at North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota, of the gate to rail. And so we had 356 lambs, and I think that this is a good just composition of, if everybody brought 8 to 10 lambs here and at least in our area here in the northern plains or upper Midwest. I know we've got some producers that are from across the country and potentially even focused in the Intermountain West, and so these might be different, but we're going to have some differences. And you see some that are white face, some that are black face, and certainly some that are in the middle, and no arguments that those might be the best ones anyway. So just a couple summary information from that one is that with our dressing percentage, it was a little bit over 50%, fat thickness 0.32, ribeye area 2.36, and some research that we conducted in years following, we did increase that from 2.36 to nearly 2.5 or 2.6 on some lambs that would have been of similar genetics. So we can make some improvements there. But when we think about it from a growth curve standpoint, a lot of those that are getting older are getting, again, more fat deposition. I put this one in here because as we talked about the age determinant, and this was from our discussions with food service and retailers, is that people would prefer young lamb. And we'll actually discuss that just a little bit more in terms of what's out there for people. And also with kind of coordinating this with Ms. Megan Wortman and Ms. Carissa Isaacs of where we've kind of been in terms of flavor profile as well, and some of the reasons that quality is important. And so one of the individuals said, absolutely, young lamb is necessary. And then at the bottom, we need to clearly define what lamb is, and preferably it's going to be 1 year of age. So in a quick description, and I gave a snapshot of USDA quality grade and yield grade, and I have this information from several different years and different times of when we've presented this, but it stays relatively similar. At prime will be approximately 6 to 8% of the lambs that are graded. Most of those lambs will be choice, and in fact, if there's no rolls or ones that aren't graded, those could be either good, utility, or cull. Yield grades here, we prefer to have more yield grade 2s and yield grade 3s. This was a time when yield grade 4s and yield grade 5s were a little higher than what we would have preferred. But we'll draw your attention to the picture at the bottom there that has a spool joint on the right and a break joint on the left. And so if we have a break joint, then we can be considered that animal, or 2 break joints. But if we have that, then we can be considered that would be a lamb carcass. Those that would be spools would not be eligible for the prime or choice grade for the most part. So when we asked our retailers in food service, and I thought this was an intriguing part as well, of USDA yield and quality grade, is that something that we use? In fact, it was kind of limited. And that doesn't mean that it isn't a good thing to sort carcasses, and we'll have some options and identifying things that we can move forward with. But at this point, some may choose USDA choice or better. And a lot of times individuals would prefer something that would have the improvement in cutability, yet there isn't always that value differentiation across our supply chain. One of the quick things to address here is then in quality grade, of carcass conformation and flank streaking. And in fact, I have some pictures as well. These are the pictures that are used in our meat sciences portions and educational resources. And then on the top, going from flank streaking of traces, slight, small, modest, and moderate. And then on the bottom with the carcass conformation of prime, low prime, choice, low choice, and good. In fact, most of those from a carcass conformation would be approximately in the high choice. And in fact, the large group of lambs that we have there on the left-hand side were ones that were harvested at North Dakota State University in our meats laboratory. Those are lambs that weighed about 140 pounds, averaged a little bit better than 50%, and we're about 73 pounds carcass. But lambs that are just kind of home base. And as we think of those would be ones that would be potentially from average choice to low prime, would catch all of them from a conformation standpoint. And then I show one on the edge, and the one on the edge that's on the right side is certainly muscular, and you should be able to see the shape in its leg and sirloin, loin, and rack. And so if you see that, that was actually it has a 105-pound carcass. So you can be well aware that that was a big sheep. And in fact, it was an Oklahoma club lamb. And so you can see that there was a bunch of muscle. That would no doubt be one from a conformation standpoint that's in the high prime location. So here's some pictures that I took that hopefully shows just a little bit clearer image of moving from slight to small to modest to moderate. And in fact, one thing that I'll point out is that on the top portion of the flank is the primary or primary flank streaking. And so you can see that increasing a little bit from left to right. And in fact, on the bottom, there are two other specific portions of meat that are there. And the second one, as crazy as that is, or the middle one, is where we would look for secondary flank streaking. In fact, I show the second from the left picture because that one has a larger amount of secondary flank streaking. And the bottom muscle where you see a little bit of a separation is the diaphragm. And so the diaphragm is not particularly evaluated as we look at that. So lamb cutability is an important part of our industry. And as we think about quality, it depends on who you ask. And so there are some things of how we describe that, and we'll talk through things, and I look forward to future discussion. But with quality, some consider cutability to be very important as well. And here's a picture of 5 lamb carcasses from USDA yield grade 1, going from left to right: yield grade 1, yield grade 2, yield grade 3, yield grade 4, and yield grade 5. Now you can tell that there's differences in terms of trimness, which is the indication of the amount of back fat that they would have at the 12th rib times 10 plus 0.4. But there's also a difference in shape, and no doubtably, there's going to be a difference in percentage of yield. So some research that was conducted and funded by the American Lamb Board by NITO in 2009 did show the boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts are going to decrease, so the percentage of those are going to decrease as we move through from yield grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Information that we had and collected from those group of lambs that I showed you with a bunch of those speckle faces identified that those that are heavier are going to have an increased amount of waste, or in this one, we are evaluating the percent of boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts. And so as we got into the heavier carcasses, the percentage of carcasses that's trimmed or not utilized in the retail standpoint increased. I got to throw this slide in, and I'm excited that Carissa is here to join us and augment some of our thoughts. But I think that it's a great time in the industry, and we have some resources and tools, whether that's the NSIP program, whether that's carcass ultrasounding, whether it's lamb instrument grading, to identify some of the things that we can do to improve and look at, and at the very least, measure And so when we think about it, of course, it's been said that you can't manage what you can't measure. And in fact, if we know more information in our ovine carcass or our cutability portions, then we can be able to make some decisions as well. I'd be remiss if we talked about quality and yield and where our target is without at least evaluating just one quick slide on seasonality. And this is showing where a lot of the operations have the percentage of when the lambs are born. And you can certainly see that most of those are going to be in January, February, March, okay, April, and May as well. And so, depending on percentage there, as you see, the lighter colored is a shift farther to the middle. And so, those that have more range flock operations will be closer to the March, April, May. Those with the smaller amount of smaller numbers get a little bit more uniform there of some in January, February, March, and April. But this is one of the challenges and one of the exciting things about our lamb industry is that we can be able to hopefully balance those. And one of the things that's so great, even Melinda, before we get some of those questions, is that I think we do a tremendous job of providing fresh American lamb at all months. And so it's a little bit more challenging now as we relate it to supply, but it's an exciting thing in our production process that we can be able to have some impact. So, a large part of the reason of why do people purchase lamb was actually flavor. And so, again, Dr. Bass asked for me to grab just a little bit from some of our fundamental work that was in the National Lamb Quality Audit. And so, just to talk through these a little bit, is that this was the reason that people purchased lamb, or the reason that people didn't purchase lamb. And eating satisfaction, going from left to right, origin, sheep raising practices, product appearance and composition, weight and size, nutrition and wholesomeness, and product convenience and form. So, one of the quick things that I want to discuss on those is that they're still in the same order, but eating satisfaction was the first and foremost. And in fact, the reason or what did that mean to them is it meant lamb flavor or taste. Also, with a origin, locally raised was important, and the more important than American in this research, and grass-fed and humanely raised were things for sheep raising practices. Following it out with fresh lamb color, consistent cut size, healthy, and then truthfully availability. So again, just in summary there, we said flavor was extremely important on what we wanted to do. We know that the local movement is absolutely real and that the origin was important for what did quality mean to people of building that connection and meeting people and knowing those operations. And from a sheep raising practices, we have a great opportunity because people do believe that we provide a wholesome product. And these are some lambs actually in back in Colorado. And so people believe that we raise a high quality product and certainly have that perception. It's then if we're going to do it. I pretty much throw this in because it's extremely exciting as well. And I think when we talk about it from an end product of where are we going to be at, where do we develop our target, is that this target, at least in price right now, in calendar year 2021, are seeing prices that truthfully I've never been able to update at these levels and provide the best information that we can. But $6.28, or at least according to our lamb cutout information, or lambs that are worth 430 lamb carcasses that are worth $439. And in fact, lamb prices of live lambs that have had an extremely strong 2021 and continuing to be pushed. And we'll have plenty of experts that will be able to talk on a little bit more of the supply and demand as we relate to that. So I got a picture there of Carissa because Carissa was a talented student that came through our master's program at Colorado State University. And I sincerely appreciate her efforts on helping with our lamb product dimensions. And so we asked, where do we want to be with what is the ideal lamb carcass? And so in terms of longissimus dorsi area, okay, or the LD, or the portion that we are evaluating there with that lamb grid in the middle, which would be called a ribeye if it was on the top anterior part or forward, or loin eye as we move back. But the United States had a 3.03 inches squared for LD. Australia was lower at 2.6, and New Zealand was the lowest at 2.25. Those were cuts that were merchandise and purchased at U.S. retail stores. A little bit in terms of the fat is that the Australian was trimmer at 0.23 and 0.25, and truthfully going over the 50% mark, which would be in the middle of those, 0.25 was trimmer than both 0.33 and 0.34 as it was presented at the grocery store. So tenderness evaluation, we also evaluated steaks in relation to tenderness, and it'd be, again, a challenge if we talked about lamb quality and didn't at least address or discuss tenderness of our lamb portions. And so one of the things that was noted here in both the loin chop and the rib chop is that Australia and New Zealand had a lower Warner-Bratzler shear force value, meaning that those were more tender. What I can also tell you is that with these particular cuts, is that the U.S. or the American rib chop at 1.9 and the loin chop at 1.78 is that a American beef tenderloin would commonly be in the 2.2 range, and so tenderness certainly isn't an issue for particularly any of these cuts. And in fact, there'd be more of connective tissue or challenges as we think of the shoulder or the leg as well. So we needed to address quick here the ethnic marking and keep it on task. And I know that others may have some more to discuss, but it'd be silly if we talked about defining where that target is without realizing that the target keeps moving. And in fact, the target has changed, particularly here in early calendar year 2021, is that more lambs were sold or not part of our commercial production programs, and those lambs were sold and merchandised at 60, 80 pounds or somewhere in between. And these are in fact a group of carcasses that are about 35 to 40 pounds as the carcasses. And they're trim and they're certainly younger in their life, and these moved on, and actually a lot of our lambs are merchandised as we move to the northeast part of the country, and that's where these were going as well. But there's lots of different ethnic cuisines, and I truthfully believe that American consumers are adventurous. Okay, and so at the end of today's lecture, if you're not interested in feeding your adventurous side, then shame on you, because we certainly should be. But a lot of different lamb and goat certainly makes it into a variety of cuisines. So that's provided opportunities, and here in North Dakota and Minnesota, producers that I get to work with, more lambs have went to market, and in fact, when they were at prices that were near or over $3 per pound, it just made sense to at least take some of your risk out and to merchandise some of those lambs, and if you so wish to feed them out, yet still here in the middle part of the summer, you did have some options that provided you a lot of return on investment because most of them had left the market. I told you that I would provide some information here quickly on goats, and so there's three things here, three selection criteria. And the first, and again, as we talked about lamb quality, it was first quality grading, and which is derivative of age and the break joint and the spool joint, carcass conformation, and flank streaking, and then the yield grade, which is an indication of cutability, and looking at the 12th rib back fat thickness. But on goats, it's primarily oscularity. So we have selection 1, selection 2, and selection 3. That's a large, more portion dairy influenced. And so there is a bigger difference, and those are some associated 1, 2, and 3 goat muscle scores. And so you can see that even on this group of goats is that the external fat, there just really isn't very much. And a lot of the times the goats will not put on as much external fat as they will internal fat. And so as we get those animals of how they age and how they put on adipose tissue, a lot of that is internally. So just our muscles matter. And so one quick evaluation. And again, I showed you the cutouts of some of the primals, and we can talk about that at a later time. But it is important because from a meat scientist standpoint, where those muscles are is important of whether they were being used for locomotion or whether they were being using for support. If we think of the tender loin, okay, or the sos major, that's used for support. It's under the backbone. That's why that one is so, a large portion of why that's so tender. If we think about it from the shoulder, that's the steering wheel. The rear legs are the gas button, or what allows things to go. And so there's more movement, and it depends on how we wish to present that, from either a dry heat of cooking them on a barbecue or pan frying them, or braising them and providing moist heat. So I threw a quick picture in here to just bounce back and forth there. And a lot of the goat that's merchandised, and at least in this area, and a lot that you would be able to get at a retail setting, is truthfully just cubed goat. Okay, and so they take the whole carcass, and you're going to get a little bit of each of the cuts, but that provides them the opportunity to use most commonly in soups and stews and other varieties. I've got a couple infographics that we've been able to complete at the University of Minnesota. And so, in fact, I have the website there of extension.umn.edu, and it's under buying animals and meat processing. And so, with our portions of a whole lamb, we can identify again then those retail or those primal cuts. And this is some information again pulled from NITO in 2009 and interpreted and kind of pulled all this together of what we would expect of potentially 8-ounce shoulder chops, 16 4-ounce rib chops, or they could be roasts, 14 loin chops. Okay, obviously we're going to have foreshanks and hind shanks, and our ribs that can be cut up as and sold as Denver ribs if we so choose. And then depending on retail yield of what you may have on ground lamb, and how you wish to provide your leg, of whether that's boneless, cut, added into the grind, or wish to make kebabs and stew meats, so that we can have some lamb kebabs here for our summer grilling. How much meat is in a goat? In fact, goats are commonly not fabricated at the same level that lambs are. They're going to be much more kept in whole primal cuts in comparison to cutting them up into rack chops or rib chops and loin chops. But this gives you the guesstimation there of predicted amount of meat from each of those cuts of neck and shoulder, foreleg, rack and loin together, ribs, and our hind leg. Last thing I want to touch on here is just some summary information. And again, we're tasked of identifying what is the target, where is home base. And so if we were to really think about where is home base in comparison to our sheep industry, is that preferably we keep those young. Again, seasonality can cause us a challenge, but preferably we keep young animals that are growing. We'd like to keep them trim, or at least on the trimmer side of 0.2 back fat, potentially 0.3. As we move past that, we lose certainly more in terms of external fat that needs to be trimmed off, and then also internal or seam fat that causes a challenge as well. And in terms of muscularity, for the most part, we would like to have them as muscular as we can. And again, Spot was on the edge, so I'm not saying that that's exactly where we need to be. But if we can make improvements, even within our own subset with carcass ultrasound or NSIP data that would say this is one that's going to have an increase in loin eye depth or potentially loin eye area, then that provides hopefully an indication that we can have a greater amount of retail cutout. And so the strategic goals that we had is address factors contributing to lamb flavor. And so we've made some improvements on lamb flavor. And then where the number 2 is, what can we do to have market ready targets for product size, composition, and eating satisfaction? And I think that Carissa will be able to talk on that and product size and composition. and how we're hitting that. The other thing that I would say on that goal number 2 is that we produce all kinds of lambs, from Shetlands to large Suffolk sheep. And so in between there, we have places and resources for all those. The difference is that if we can hit that home base of 65 to 75 pound carcasses, we just have more flexibility of whether those go to retail or go to food service. And then identify and capitalize on market opportunities for American lamb. And Ms. Megan Wortman has joined us, and I know that she will talk about how we've been able to market tremendous amount of things and lamb to a wide variety of consumers and a wide variety of individuals of demographics that want to feed their adventurous side. So my contact information is that I do get to be the extension sheep specialist at North Dakota State University and for the University of Minnesota. Office number 701-231-2222. And my email address is travis.w.hoffman@ndsu.edu. And Dr. Ellison, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts, and appreciate all that you guys have done at the University of Idaho and the University of Wyoming and Utah State University to continue to provide producer education. And so thank you very much for letting me be involved.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us as well. You have one question so far, and I'll remind our audience to place any questions that you have in the Q&A box. The first one is, what was the breed of spot in the first lamb picture, which popped in about the time that you were showing the
thank you for asking.
Okay.
Spot is a 100% Ile-de-France. And so Ile-de-France's are a more moderate sized breed of sheep that I guess from a commercial standpoint, I consider most similar to Dorset, at least in genetics, obviously a different origin of not coming from United Kingdom, but coming from France, obviously. But the Ile-de-France, and so that's a producer that we have in Minnesota. And at least since I've been here, now 5 years, each year I go out there and ultrasound carcass or ultrasound the lambs to collect information. He makes breeding decisions, and there's also potentially it is not callipage, all right, and callipage is not my friend, because callipage makes it extremely tough, and for market research we had to make sure that it wasn't. But there is a little bit of a change in relation to myostatin use and development in a little bit of a lines that he does produce. So those are Ile-de-France's, and as you select, there was actually a little bit of a change in terms of just some of the myostatin that's used, and it certainly tastes good. They look a little rebellious, but they are still high quality sheep, and it was on the end. I'm not saying it's the answer, but thanks for at least the question of providing that interpretation.
Great. The other question that came in is whether or not you have any research on finishing with oil seed meal. We have excellent results with camelina meal as part of our grain ration.
I think that that's certainly something to keep into consideration. I would want to look at future info or what is out there, Luke, to provide you a little bit more accurate work on camelina. But what we can say is that when we increase the amount of oils, that can actually change a little bit of the composition of some of those fatty acids. And so I would project that even if you've raised some of those or looked at consume them, that there shouldn't be a dynamic difference. One of the things that I would keep into consideration would be how much. And so Melinda, I would say that, even as we think about it from the oil seed meals, is that we really don't want to probably go much more than about 30%. Otherwise, we have changes in the amount of fat and the bypasses that then changes kind of the nutrition of the ruminant system. And so if you were able to keep just in the meals at 30% of the diet or less, then that would most likely keep you just on pace, and there shouldn't be significant flavor differences.
Okay. What is your recommendation on growing lambs with more muscle and not fat. Should we be grazing or hay feeding only, and grain feed maybe 1 month before finishing?
Okay, I'm going to keep that one up. That's a great question. And so one of the things that I would keep into consideration is that in relation to muscle, a lot of that is genetically predispositioned. And so those that have muscle are going to have muscle, right? And so if we think about it from that standpoint, we're not going to change very much in terms of the amount of muscle that's going to be on that frame. What we are more describing as we think about this from a growth and maturity curve standpoint is that we're extending the growth curve. And so you're allowing frame to grow before you put on more of that fat or adipose tissue. And so as you think about it, the growing lamb, so you're saying, should we be grazing or hay feeding only, and grain feed maybe the last part? So what you're doing is that if you so choose grazing or hay feeding, is that you're allowing that body to grow and that frame to get larger and to get longer. And certainly some individuals, as you know, Melinda, in Idaho, kind of do that or choose different ways that they can to get those lambs just a little bit bigger before they spend some of that time on a finishing ration or a more high concentrate diet. So it's up to you, but I still think that if from an efficiency standpoint, if you have an increase in the amount of grain throughout its life, or even if it's something that's lower in terms of energy, that's such as oats. One of the things that I would say would be a good balance with that is certainly not just grazing or hay feeding if you wanted to be efficient, and it's certainly not just corn with some supplementation of hay, but maybe we use soybean hulls, maybe we use wheat midds, maybe we use oats. Okay, I would say that oats is one of my favorite feedstuffs, and it's underutilized. Some people have barley that's more accessible, and so evaluating what you can do, and it doesn't have to be at a large standpoint, but that will allow those animals to just continue to grow before you push to an increase on the corn and the higher energy diet. Thank you for letting me answer that question.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you coming on and joining us today.